The international break is going on, but that does not mean that the Barca news stops. In fact, this, with all the matches coming up and trophy season upon us, is just the calm before the storm. Welcome to episode 670 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I am Dan Hilton, and yes, there are so many things happening, so many things going on, that I just needed a week or a few days at least to take a breath, relax, because things are going to be happening. You could join me on all the watch-alongs. I'm going to have post-game content as well for everything coming up in the next few weeks, including the rescheduled matchup against Osasuna on the 27th, the Girona match on the 30th, the PenyaPalooza event that is going to be taking place the next day after the Girona match, and then Atletico Madrid in the Copa del Rey the next Wednesday. All of those watch-alongs will be on Big Up, so please join me for that. You can subscribe through the link down below, as well as subscribing to the YouTube channel, leaving a comment, leaving a like, help me out on the podcast apps if you're listening on audio, or help me out on Patreon. There's so many ways to help out the Barcelona podcast community, so I look forward to seeing you in all those different spots. Without further ado, let's dive into the 5 headlines of the week. Our first piece of news is Marc headlines the injury bug. Unfortunately, it wasn't even the FIFA virus. Both Inigo Martinez and Marc getting hurt against Atletico Madrid right before the break. And for Casado, it's the worst news. It seems like he will miss the rest of the season due to a right knee injury. It's only a partial tear, so it won't require surgery or anything, but the belief is that he will be out for around 2 months, which, yes, does take us to about the end of the season. And even if he is able to return, that gives him little time to regain his fitness. And the question would be, how will Barcelona survive without him? Of all the positions and players, I think, around the club, Barca might be best equipped to deal with an injury to a player like Casado. Yes, the level down to Eric Garcia is a bit of a jump down, but his level, that being Eric Garcia's, has been good enough to rotate in for Frankie de Jong in certain situations. If it were me, I would start Eric Garcia against Osasuna. He'll be fresher than de Jong after the international break, and even a loss against Osasuna won't change Barca's position in the table. As for some good news at Casado's position, it does appear like Marc Bernal's recovery is going really well, and he'll be out on the pitch before too long. That still puts his recovery around September or October, but in the case of an ACL injury to a young player like that, any lack of bad news is definitely good news when it comes to Bernal. And it's a reminder, too, that he is just 18 for all of next season, so he could very well be the future of Arsenal's midfield, the way he looked in the few appearances he had early this season as a 17-year-old. Inigo Martinez, meanwhile, has suffered a knee injury, but it is less severe than Casado's. He did get injured against Atletico Madrid, but he'll likely be back in early April. As long as Araujo does stay healthy, you can expect Cubarsí and Araujo for the next few games, but barring anything else, Cubarsí also picked up a little knock with Spain, and Araujo, we know who he is with his injury record, especially with Uruguay, which is how he got hurt the first time. Yeah, I'm a bit cautious and a bit worried about Inigo Martinez's injury, more so than you think. And lastly, maybe some good news, but I say almost a nothing burger here. Christensen should be back in early April, but he also was expected back before some other setbacks. Has not played yet this season, so I don't really think Christensen is a player that either Hansi Flick or Kool-Aids can truly rely on for the rest of this season. Those who joined me on a recent watch-along already saw this, but I am happy to be partnering with Goal Shop, who hooked me up with some of those jerseys that I had on my list, but I never was willing to pull the trigger, at least until now. As you can see, I feel like I look good in pink, so they hooked me up with this Inter Miami Messi jersey, as well as, for, of course, the Barcelona fan in me, this Centennial jersey, which, again, I've had on my list, but maybe it's just the fact that I don't really feel like I look too great in navy, as well as this France 1998 World Cup jersey, which, obviously, if you've been with me for quite some time, you know that the man on the back has got to be none other than Thierry Henry. Goal Shop has tons of teams, current and vintage players, current and vintage jerseys, and stuff for the whole family. If you go to the link down in the description, you can get an exclusive 15% off coupon with code TBPOD. That's all lowercase TBPOD. All right, back to those headlines. Our second piece of news is that the Osasuna match is now been set. We know when it will be, and it's kind of against the wishes of Barcelona and Osasuna, because after both Barcelona and Osasuna attempted to reschedule their match that was postponed to later in the season, the joint appeal was rejected, and the game will now go forward next Thursday, the 27th. Barcelona could be a bit shorthanded for it, with Ronald Araujo and Rafinha playing for their national teams just 2 days beforehand. Even the other internationals, they won't really have time to relax either. So, yeah, it's a game that Barcelona very well, with Osasuna having a lot less internationals, could drop points in. So the question will be for Hansi Flick leading into that match, do you rotate? How much do you rotate? Are you forced to rotate? Because based on match form and all those things, it's probably not the time for Ansu Fati, but maybe it should be, just based on available bodies. Gavi, Eric Garcia, Balde, Pau Victor didn't join the Spanish national teams. And at least obviously in the case of Balde, I expect him to start. So how much of Gavi, Eric Garcia, again, Pau Victor, Ansu Fati, all those first team players that were not internationals this break, I do wonder which are actually going to feature and how much Hansi Flick can trust them. And maybe he does, because interestingly enough, those players all got days off and were not asked to be called up for the Copa Catalunya match against Espanyol. And the reason I didn't cover that or do a watch along or anything like that is it was a 5-0 loss. And looking at the lineups, I'm glad that I did not cover it, because it definitely doesn't even deserve to be its own headline here. Not only did the club not prioritize that competition to put any senior players into it, but Barça Athletic, being 8 points away from safety in the relegation zone down in the third division, that being the Barça Athletic one, was also prioritized over the Copa Catalunya, which consisted of Juvenil A and Juvenil B, which is the U19 and U18s. And even then, a lot of the best U19, U18 players for Barcelona are playing currently for Barça Athletic, or they're featuring in some way in the first team. So it was a group of basically backup U19 players losing to Espanyol 5-0. I do not care in the very least about that match, unfortunately, and the club, I guess, didn't either. Our third piece of news is an update for the Barça Femení, who went to Germany and crushed Wolfsburg in the first leg of their quarterfinal matchup in the Champions League. 4-1 was the final in that one, and an own goal got a start in the 26th minute. But come the second half, that is when Barça really turned up the heat and the goals started coming. Arim Paredes and Salma Parriello scored within 3 minutes of each other. And then Sydney Schertenlieb scored a wonderful goal for the fourth late in the game in what could have been the moment that put the tie to bed. The 18-year-old's first Champions League goal should be one of many for her. Maybe she doesn't have the ceiling that Vicky Lopez does, but yeah, Barça, they keep producing really young talents. She did come in for Alexia Putellas in the 85th minute. That's after Alexia, Aitana, and Caroline Graham-Hansen were all the superstars we think they are in the Champions League. So the substitute appearance really worked out great. A destruction of Real Madrid in the recent Clásico is a reminder that this team is continuing to rev up the pressure as they prepare themselves and try to get healthy for what could be another fruitful Champions League campaign. Our fourth piece of news is just about the international matches. Obviously, the reason why the first team is off, because many of them are away on international duty. So just for bookkeeping purposes, a reminder of the international game this week. Kubarsi, who did pick up a knock against the Dutch yesterday in a 2-2 draw, he was joined by Pedri, Dani Olmo, Lamine Yamal, and Ferran Torres with Spain. Pedri did struggle a bit in a higher position in their matchup against the Netherlands yesterday, but the star of that show was actually Frankie de Jong, who got a standing ovation. The second leg of that Nations League quarterfinal between the two will be taking place on Sunday. Koundé and France are also in the Nations League quarterfinal against Croatia. Their second leg is on Sunday, and France will need to overcome a 2-0 deficit. Lewandowski and Poland are World Cup qualifiers against Lithuania and Malta. No need to update you on those. And then in South America, Rafinha was the star against Colombia in a World Cup qualifier win. And now comes Argentina on Tuesday. For Ronald Araujo and Uruguay, they play Argentina and Bolivia on Tuesday. For the U21s, it's Fermin, Pablo Torre, and Gerard Martin against Czechia and Germany today and Tuesday. For Martin, it's his first call-up for any Spanish national team at any level. So exciting for him, and congratulations, Gerard Martin. And then our last piece of news is some transfer buzz. That is Givairo Reed from Feyenoord is linked to the club. He's an 18-year-old right back. And the reason we talk about it is, yes, the international break. You usually don't really worry about these kind of stories, and the international break is where these pop up. But there does seem to be something to this. Or at least all there is an agent throwing this, that being Barcelona's name out, to pump up the transfer fee for a player that is likely going to go to Liverpool. So Reed being linked to Barcelona, he could be gotten for around 4 to 10 million. His valuation may be 4, but there are other clubs, as I said, like Liverpool, heavily circulating or more even closely linked to him. So that could drive up his price even more than just the 4 that I said. He can play at left back as well, and recently made some history this past week with 3 assists in the Eredivisie, becoming the youngest player in the Eredivisie with 3 assists in one match in the 21st century. It doesn't sound like much until you remember how many young players do play in the Netherlands and play in their league. And from what I've seen, which honestly was just some Champions League time against AC Milan, Inter Milan, he does look really promising. The defensive positioning would be an initial concern, but his attacking potential is clearly sky high. He reminds me of Balde. He also reminds me a bit of Serginho Dest as well when I saw him at Ajax, but he reminds me more of Balde in his first season with Barca. He's so quick and he's quite the dribbler. And I also think he's a bit more physically developed on the upper body than Balde was in his first year at that same age. But Balde was also, I think, a bit better defensively. He didn't look it in the academy, but he did when he came up to the first team, that being Balde. And for Reed, I do expect him to go to Liverpool. Apparently, he's a fan of Liverpool, and they will push for him pretty hard. But hey, at the very least, I said Barca could drive up the price. And hey, maybe he does actually want to come to Barcelona, and they can offer him a little bit something more of a project behind Koundé. Then maybe Liverpool can. Who knows? Before we part, I do have some questions. First, a transfer question from Finn. Finn asks, why do Barcelona seem so set on signing a player like Diaz or Isak for big money when Jonathan David of Lille is completely free this summer? Don't get me wrong, he's not at Isak's level, but surely should be considered heavily at this point. I do think Jonathan David is a player that Barcelona will be looking at, but at his age, I think for the number that a club will likely sign him for, even as a free agent, that contract, as in per year contract they're going to have to sign him to, might not equal the player he is. I think he's going to fetch big money. Just because you're a free agent doesn't mean that you can't get a pretty good wage. And so I do expect Jonathan David to likely go somewhere for some big money. And if you're Barcelona, you kind of want to go for a sure thing. And I think at this point, we are kind of expecting Isak to be as close to a sure thing as possible. Luis Diaz, I don't know, but it does seem at Liverpool like he, for what Barcelona want him for, is going to be a sure thing. It just depends on what number. And then lastly, I do have a Patreon question from Shoaib that I've been sitting on for a little bit while. He says, given Barca's surplus and stellar talent in midfield, Pablo Torre, Fermin Lopez, among others, combined with the need to upgrade the wings and striker, what are your thoughts on the possible trade avenues for the club? I haven't seen much credible commentary here and don't know if Barcelona would consider. Now, I just kind of want to answer this in terms of player swaps. You don't really see a lot of them. It's why the first thing that I always think about is Samuel Eto'o plus some money for Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Obviously, it doesn't work out for Barcelona, but very rarely do you truly see player swaps. It's just not something that happens a lot in football because usually that means that one club is having to devalue one of their players a little bit. And when we talk about a player like Pablo Torre, I think he's probably worth around 15 million euros to a club. I think a lot of clubs will have seen enough from him, even at Barcelona, to know that, hey, if you give him the keys to your offense and do protect him defensively, he could do wonders for some kind of lower side club. I mean, even in the Premier League, he could be a luxury player because you do have enough spots there, and those clubs can pay for players to kind of be more luxury assets at some point. So with the Spanish release clauses being the way they are as well, and kind of having to force clubs to come in and pay big money and big dollar for some of your talent, I think that players, especially in Spain, they would lose their value in swaps. So again, instead of putting Pablo Torre in a deal and swapping him for another player while adding obviously a ton of cash, I'd rather just sell him independently and then use that money to fork up front for a player. And the reason we bring that up really is because the likes of Pablo Torre, Pau Victor, Ansu Fati, all three, or maybe at least two of the three, I can't see them being even around the club in the future. So I think the club is probably going to want to sell all three of these assets in the summertime when their valuation might still, I mean, I don't know about Ansu at this point, but they should still get something for all of those three. Again, I want to remind you that I will have the watch-alongs for all of Osasuna on the 27th, Girona on the 30th. Then it is PenyaPalooza at 8:30 East Coast time on Monday night. All Penyas are welcome. And I've been getting comments, hey, I know my local Penya here. Send me the info. It's all down below. It's through Big Up. It's going to be a virtual event. So join on Big Up. Again, just sit in and you can either learn where the Penya is, meet your Penya, figure out where your Penya is. It's going to be a really good time. So I do implore everyone to join me on that. And then, of course, we will have Atletico Madrid in the Copa del Rey for that second leg the following Wednesday. Please subscribe to the channel. As I said, follow me along everywhere on social media. And as always, until next time, Forza Barça.